Another questions? Yes, sir.
What kind of changes to national and regional transmission grids would the panel feel necessary to shift towards a renewable energy dominant generation portfolio? And how do you think those changes should be or could be financed?
This is a question that we deal with on all of our projects, and there's actually an encouraging sign from some of the utilities. From 3 or 4 years ago, when you talk to these utilities, they talked about wind coming on their system because it's a new type of generation that they have to learn how to work within their generation planning. They used to talk about it as something they're trying to avoid or trying to convince people not to do on their system. Now when you have those same meetings, people are talking about how to best integrate it with the system. And today you might go in and talk to the transmission authority, and they might say, well, in this part of the state, I'm really sort of overwhelmed with wind. I'd rather see more of it developed in areas like this, which kind of gives you a clue. So some of it is just acceptance. Some of it is just PUCs and other regulators who turn to the utility and say, you're going to have some of this stuff on your system. Now figure out how to take it in. So that'd be my 2 cents.
I think that's quite right. I think what's going to happen, I think we're going to see the utilities, like they changed they look at cogeneration when PURPA was invented. They're going to change their look at how they accept it. They're going to have no choice, and it'll automatically come in. Another question? Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I come from the Midwest where there's a lot of speculation in the area of wind, so I'm really interested in this community ownership model. I went recently to a conference focused on community solutions, and there were a number of wind developers that presented on their community ownership models, and most of them sort of the model went as follows. It was developer owned until the incentives expired, and then it was turned over a few years later to the community. Can you distinguish, this is for Mr. Susman, can you distinguish your community ownership model from that one, if there is a distinction?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And just a quick plug for the industry at large. There are tons of different models, but I think what you typically find from wind developers, be they large-scale IPPs or earlier stage companies like ours, there is a much more heightened level of concern about the impact of the project on the community than, say, there would be from some other forms of generation. So hopefully that's what you're seeing out in the Midwest as well. In the particular model you're talking about, which is sometimes referred to as the Minnesota flip, a lot of it was focused around the way a particular type of legislation had been structured called seabed. And the seabed contract made it such that external investors could be brought into the project, make the lion's share of their return in the early part of the project so that they could hand over the ownership of the project to the community in the latter half. Our model focuses on something similar, but at an earlier stage in the development cycle. I showed you that chart where investment ramps up over the life. During the development period, we and our local partner are significant owners in the project. In fact, we are together 100% owners of the project. Later in the project's life cycle, we typically would invite in a partner, somebody perhaps like NL or another utility of that sort, in which case we and our partner would likely become smaller owners in the project. So a little bit of a distinction from the Minnesota flip.
We have time for a couple of more questions. Are there any more questions? Here, there?
Way up top.
Way up top. There you go.
First, Mr. Susman, I want to hear a little bit more about your skepticism that you had referred to about the transmission, and what is it that's making you feel that way?
Why don't I'm going to turn that over to Tony, actually, if you don't mind, because you probably spend more of your time thinking about this than I do, because we're generating projects in the heartland for the heartland, so you may have this more on your mind.
Well, of course, we don't have skepticism in terms of transmission. I mean, what we think is basically it was one of the points I was making in my conclusion, which is transmission is something that needs a coordinated effort between market-based solutions and some sort of planned solution. So We see that happening already in some of the states, like in Texas, for example, with the CREZ, where basically the regulator is making an effort to try to plan and decide where it makes the most sense to build transmission. And I think those projects are going to happen. And it's in particular because if the United States is serious about meeting a 20-25% target of renewable energy, there's not going to be any other way to do it than to build transmission line. I mean, we can develop all the community wind that we want, but it's just not going to be enough to meet those type of targets. And again, transmission is not that complicated of a business. Again, it's true, it requires a lot of capital, as does the building the power generating facilities, the renewable energy power generating facilities, but we have no skepticism. The only thing that we think is that there needs some coordination, because otherwise, of course, just based on market forces, it's probably not going to happen. And it needs also, again, it goes back to the point of the incentives where, or the regulatory framework. Also in the case of transmission, we need a regulatory framework and probably some incentives which need to be stable for a long period of time. As of today, I don't recall particular incentives or that will accelerate the development. So it's just a portion of the energy policy which I think is not yet being addressed by the regulators, but hopefully it will be.
Let me thank you all for attending this very long day, but very profitable for us all. There is a reception for all of us, all the delegates, on the 4th floor this evening. If you go up there right now, you will be able to relax and network with each other. Thank you so much for a wonderful day.